Well, I'll thank everyone at the beginning. Then the thanks are done. And I would like to talk to you about money and life. And I think that this follows beautifully. Oops. Well, except that's fine. Beautifully from the last presentation by Claire. In thinking about the relationship between money and life, first I'd like to remind you of something that Claire just said, which is that an economy is social relations. Well, for me as an anthropologist, money is also social relations. All that money is a record of our credits and debts with one another, as anthropologists as diverse as Mose and Graeber have pointed out. So money is life. Money is human life. Many of us in anthropology of money write about money as a great record of all of the transactions that take place among humans. You don't need any material token to symbolize that. All you need is some system of record keeping. And also at the origin of the systems of record keeping that we see give rise to the thing that then recognizably becomes money to those of us in the capitalist West, at that origin point, there are living things, like these grains of barley here on the left. The earliest transactional records on cuneiform tablets essentially were marking relations of credit and debt among people both over barley and denominated in terms of barley in the ancient Near East. At the mundane level, those sort of early receipts were about this stuff of subsistence. At the prestige level, among those who were keeping track of those records, holding them in great storehouses and temples, prestige items circulated across the ancient world that often, again, indexed the materiality of life behind, if you will, money. So we have objects like this thing in the middle from Anatolia, somewhere between 1000 and 2000 BC. That's a oxen cart, a prestige item that would have circulated among people of a certain social status. And then on the far right is a big silver crater, a wine vessel that would have held wine, circulating in the regions that the Phoenicians colonized out to the west of Europe. Again, the wine, a living thing. The kind of coming of the money that we're more familiar with, that took this form, comes when the kings and tyrants, as they were called, broke up those ancient hoards of records in temples and storehouses, liberated, if you want to use a contemporary discourse to think about it, liberated silver that had been accumulating there in the form of tribute items, and started imprinting with it their own sign, stamping with it the sign of the sovereign. You can see King Darius here on this coin, which used to be in my possession but was stolen from me in Argentina. It's a long story. Anyhow, but what I find so delightful about these objects is even though there was an effort to kind of seal off, close off those human social relationships by cementing it in a coin and stamping it with the mark of the sovereign, people didn't quite get what this thing was for. And so what did they do? Well, they adopted the same inscriptorial culture that they had before when they were writing out things on papyrus or clay tablets, and marked these coins with their own mark. And you can see these little punch marks on the front and on the back that someone, basically people were endorsing these things over to one another because they didn't get that this thing could serve as a token of value in itself. If you're coming from a world where money is life, this dead object doesn't make any sense unless you give it new life by endorsing it over to the next person into whose possession it comes. Now, in this deadening world of this kind of coinage, despite the inscriptions on them, hello, there. We have commentators, philosophers, Aristotle, worrying about this kind of coming of a new culture of the coin. And Aristotle, seeing this new world, many of you are familiar with the way in which he decried it and said that this is in fact an unnatural thing. Coin as money seems to continually reproduce itself, an inanimate, non-living thing making more of itself. And so Aristotle famously argued against the making of money with money as a way to justify the civic virtues of landed estates, and famously declared money to be unnatural and against that order of landed estates. Not to say that landed estates are great, by the way, right? There's no good or bad in this story, it's just what is. The Aristotelian position on money got Christianized, and in the Middle Ages were familiar with the Christian discourse that basically took Aristotle's language of money being unnatural and translated the unnatural into the satanic. And so this is just a close-up of the triptych you just saw. You can see, can you see it? You can see the little demons here in hell, and see the butt right there? There's a little butt pooping money out. You can see that little coins? Yeah. So money, Satan, shit, excretia, money gets deadened in this period and linked to the earthly, but not in the sense that we were just discussing. There is a counter movement to this, of course, and my tale today is very much of a dialectic between two different visions of the life of money. To this, earthy in the bad sense money, the emerging mercantilist discourse drew very much on another metaphor of life, the metaphor of circulation of the blood, popularized in William Harvey's 1628 book on circulation, which Cath Weston has shown feeds right into political economy of the day, justifying mercantilism and flows of money as life again, not as shit or as death. To this circulatory metaphor, though, again in a kind of counter movement, the physiocrats, like Francois Quesnay here, linked money back to the soil against the self-expansionary character and qualities of the emerging capitalism that Harvey's circulatory metaphor animated. So I just want you to have in your mind these kind of different notions of the life of money as the human social relationships that then can get sealed up in a deadened object, which then can get linked to the excretia of life, which can then be revalued again by the physiocrats as the soil of life, the soil of value, with this vision playing off against that circulatory vision, money as circulation or money as finance. Let's fast forward to Earthrise and think about the physiocrats today. Some of the stuff that Claire was just talking about in her work finds expression in some pretty important foundational essays late in the last century that were postulating the planet as the natural limit to growth, to economic growth. And you see playing out now a similar dialectic between finance and physiocratic notions of money in ideas of natural capital and of trying to value so-called ecosystem services, the things, the value that is generated by the living activity of the planet, so that it can enter into economic relationships, be valued, be accounted for. Robert Costanza in 1997 wrote a germinal paper on ecosystem services, which might be on the next slide, but maybe isn't. Well, this is from it. That postulates this sort of series of systems and makes a point that the natural capital of so-called ecosystem services really envelops all of the social built and human capital in our economy. Costanza and others working in this trajectory even postulated, and this was for Claire specifically, soil capital and soil money, to really think about the soil functions that then feed into the generation of added value for human populations. There are a number of ways in which this idea has been literalized in proposals for physical currency objects that derive from the natural world. The eco was one such proposal by the Next Nature Network. And interestingly then, a contemporary cryptocurrency ties itself to the value of carbon. Again, think carbon in the petro-industrial complex world as a kind of death, but also remember that it is the foundation of life. Then here, in an interesting way, harking back to those ancient coins with its iconography, but taking us into the carbon cycle as a new means of value. Now, it would be wrong to just kind of leave it at that and not point out that there are the folks out there who see any speculation on such alternative monetary forms as one step closer to one world government, right? So I have a slide here from Technocracy Watch, which is what it sounds like. They're kind of worried about the technate of North America issuing universal identity cards with chips on them that are keeping track of your carbon output and giving you carbon credits. And see carbon currency as the vanguard for one world government. Be that as it may, I actually find some comfort and solace in our own US banknotes, which are becoming more and more unique in the world as physical objects because they are still made out of the cotton rag linen fiber blend that we've been using for around 100 years. There are interesting reasons why they're unlikely to be replaced by polymer, like you see in other countries. One of the reasons is that the people who make the money know that our banknotes, American banknotes, serve as a store of value for people all over the world. For a villager in India who is saving money, they're likely to save US banknotes in a jar, in a clay vessel buried in the backyard. These things need to last. Linen is remarkably durable. Our stuff here has a shelf life undisturbed of around 30, 40, even 50 years because of its natural composition. And there's another thing I'd just like to point out before I close that I find delightful about the new US $100 bill. In designing the security features for it, one of which is that blue reflective strip, the folks at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing realized that they had at their disposal a terrific way to make every single one of these objects unique. And the way to do it was to rely on the qualities of the natural fibers making up the bill itself. If you have 100, I do not, you know that there's this little strip and there are these paper bridges that seem to hold the strip in place. The edges of those bridges are defined by individual flax fibers in the slurry that makes up the paper. So instead of sort of putting it through some kind of mechanical process that then cuts those edges to make them nice and clean, the slurry is allowed to do however it works. Someone must be a paper maker here. It does what it does, and you get that nice wavy thing, that nice wavy line, every one of which is different. So if you have 100, you should look at it. If it's a straight edge, it's a fake, and you should call the police, okay? This is a way in which the circulatory notion of money and the physiocratic notion of money remains bonded in the very stuff of American currency. I think there's a lesson in this banknote for us today, and I'll leave it at that so we have time for discussion. Thanks.